like in Athens or in Greece where you guys are at. I know here in California, you know, we've been doing social distancing, and we've been doing been on, you know, shelter in place is what they call it. Lockdown is what other people call it. We're in our second week. It certainly shows in all the personal relationships. I think people want to get out and want to be able to talk. You can go to the store, you can go to the pharmacy. They've closed all the beaches, they've closed the parks, but people still go walk on the streets with their dog and that type of stuff. But I think there's a general anxiety that is just pervasive everywhere. And I'd like to talk to you about how to lead your business through this. And I think there's two fronts that I want to talk to you about. There's the people side of strategy and tactics on how to manage your people. And then there's the business side of how to manage people through this challenging time. And, you know, I would say over the last 2 weeks, it's been just an incredible journey in noticing where people are at and how their feelings are fluctuating, and also how business is fluctuating. Some businesses have just completely, I would say, shut down. Some businesses, one company that I've been working with for over 4 years, had to let 96% of their people go. I mean, it's the reality of going from 375 people to 15 people in a span of 2 weeks was just, it's mind blowing to be in those conversations and sharing with folks. And then I have two other companies that are accelerating right now. They've doubled their growth in 2 weeks from what they did in the prior year before. And so there's a little bit of a mixed experience for people. I would say there's an overarching anxiety, at least here, and a overarching stress that's here. And we are certainly in for a storm. The world will never be the same again. I think we are in the greatest challenge of our lifetime as long as we are alive. And as we navigate uncharted territory, these are a couple of things that I think you could keep in mind and may help you as you navigate all this challenge. Now, it all starts with empathy, right? It all starts with being able to really connect with people. And empathy is the ability to feel with someone, right? It's not to feel sympathy for them or to have feelings for them, but it's the ability to access your own emotions while other folks have emotions. And, you know, I know there's people who are like, you know, leaders who say, well, you know, this is my time to be strong, and this is my time. I have to, you know, have a steely resolve. I've got to captain the ship. Yes, you can be strong. And yes, you can be the captain of the ship. At the same time, what is important for people is that they know that you're present, and that you could start with some element of being able to connect with their humanity and where they're at. You know, people have fear and a lot of anxiety at this point. And so what you'll find is that when you're doing meetings with your company and with your team, there's going to be two types of meetings. And I think it's important that you separate these meetings, that you have deliberately processing meetings and then action meetings, or what I would say project management meetings. In this time, so many people have a need to process. And I would say if you're the CEO, if you're the leader of a division, what's important is that you're probably going to do 3 times as many processing meetings as project management or action meetings. And if you don't separate them, if you don't say to people, hey, I'm going to set up some meetings there for processing, and then I'm going to set up another meeting, and that is for action and project management, what you'll discover is every time you're going to do a meeting, it's going to turn into a processing meeting. And you're going to get frustrated as a leader because you're going to try and want to get to action and activation, and people have this high need for processing. So separate those meetings, make time for them. I would suggest that as the leader of your division or of the company that you're in, that you do what I call drop-in meetings, meaning that you do some one-on-one sessions with individuals who are your direct reports, and you do a processing meeting with them. This is not a set one-on-one meeting just about tasks, but really a drop-in call connect with the person. And if you do that drop-in call and you meet with that person, on a FaceTime or a Zoom call, or even just by the phone, if you're able to connect with them, spend 20 minutes helping them process, by the time you're going to do a formal group meeting, a lot of the processing will be done. It is part of what you need to do right now, is help people process, because if you cannot help people process, they're not going to be able to get to the actions that you're looking to do. So with your people leadership, it's so important to communicate with your people, to communicate with your crew. Be a clear sound above the noise. And here's a couple things to keep in mind. It's important in this moment to provide context and some direction. And your challenge is that people are asking you for details. The world is so uncertain, and everybody is trying to know, when will we hit the apex, and when's the horizon? And even here, I probably get that phone call at least twice a day. When do I think we'll hit the apex? When do we have a horizon? And it's interesting, because I think most of us function that even if the horizon is not what we'd hoped for, if we have some type of a horizon, knowing that, okay, this is how we're going to navigate this, it'll help us, kind of get on the other side. And I think there's lots of different thoughts around this. I think that, people are thinking that there will be an apex of the medical containment of the scenario. But when it comes back to business, when will we be able to travel again? When will we be able to do all of these things? I think that is a much longer window than we're anticipating. I think the medical side, to a large degree, the containment of the virus and our stay-at-home policy around the world will probably have its apex and its horizon in the next 2 months. But, just my own opinion, in order to have a horizon for business to engage again, and I don't think it'll ever go back to the way it was, but for business to engage again, we're going to need some type of vaccine or some type of therapy treatment to be able to manage that. And I actually think that that's months away. And maybe, the containment will allow us to manage the world a little bit differently. But I do think that this near-term medical piece will probably be a couple months, and then much longer when it comes to being able to engage business again. So here's your challenge. Your people are asking you for details, and your details are probably as good as a guess as mine. It feels like the variables are consistently changing every day. If you watch the news, you don't know which news to watch. Here in America, you can watch 3 different news channels and actually get 3 completely different stories. And what people consider important are vastly different from one state to another. In California, listen, it's a very interesting state. The marijuana businesses are considered essential, as are gun businesses. So you can go to the pharmacy, you can go to the grocery store, the marijuana store, and the gun store. Seems like it's so crazy. So your challenge is, people are asking you for details. They're asking you, what will happen to our company? What will happen to our team? What will happen to our business? And the honest reality is, you probably cannot give them and provide them with the details that they're looking for. So what you need to provide them with is context and direction. Context is, who are we? What are we doing together? Why are we here? What's our focus? And then a direction. And the interesting thing is that when you provide direction and your commitment, to a large degree, it will settle people down. What that sounds like is, ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with a lot of different variables right now. Our main objective right now is to conserve cash flow and to sustain our business. Now, you have my and our commitment as a leadership team to consistently and on a daily basis work together to ensure that our business is sustainable, that we're doing everything in our power to deal with every situation that comes up. We want to hear from you. Please connect with us and know that we are going to weather this storm in some form or another. Right now, we're focused on this and that, and you have our commitment to go there. When you when you do that, when you provide the direction and your commitment, to a large degree, it will settle down most people, because most people are dealing with a significant amount of fear. Now, it's the golden rule, right? In a crisis, that if you bring order, that it will it will subside whatever sense of anxiety or even anarchy that may set out. When I was younger and they taught us to deal with hostile situations, they would say, when you go into a challenging scenario, bring order as soon as you can, right? You have about 7 minutes to bring order. Now, what we have here is very different. This is not an event, but rather much more of a unprecedented experience that's prolonged. So I would say what we're seeing here, and I'm probably sure that you are seeing there, is that you have people who've now for 2 weeks basically held their breath and have gone onto a place of pause and really being in a big challenge. And what we're doing is we're managing people's fears. So the next things that we want to do is we want to take a look at our business leadership, right? The people side was providing direction and your commitment, knowing that you can't provide details, even though that's what people want. On the business side, what you're looking to do is to collaborate with people. Now, it's very challenging here because in times like these, what people often default to is a very authoritarian style of leadership. And, it is important for you as a leader to let your voice be heard. But at the same time, we're dealing with variables that are so vast and so many different things happening at the same time. It is important to bring your team together and to let them contribute and let all of your team start thinking in a collaborative way and in a creative way. So what we're doing is we have to be able to assist the situation and then bring some order and chaos, right? And again, more processing and then project managing as you go. I would say one of your biggest challenge right now is to explore both the survival and what is opportune right now. Now, and I'll get into this a little bit deeper, but what happens most often when people get stuck in a situation like this that feels overwhelming is they have only two scenarios. They have best case scenario and worst case scenario. And I'll get into that in a second here. What we're doing in business leadership is we're moving from a pause to the next phase. And that probably is going to be the hardest work for us to do in the next couple of weeks as leaders, as you're running your business, because you have to both create and adapt your plan. One thing I know, and I'm sure the realization has happened for you as well, we are not going to go back to business as usual. Unfortunately, that is not going to happen. And so the idea that we will, basically wait this out and then things are going to turn back to normal is probably an unreasonable leadership scenario. Most companies are either in a pause or in overdrive. And I think that happens for individuals as well. So here's kind of what happens when people are in a crisis. They have two things that we usually know. There's fight or flight syndrome, but the reality is most people freeze, right? They pause and they stop basically engaging. And it does feel to me like most of the world and most leaders have gone onto a pause right now. Now, first thing to know is that pause is okay. It is not an unreasonable strategy for a moment, but it's not a strategy to move forward. It's kind of like holding your breath. And one of the bigger challenges for people is if you hold your breath for an event that goes on for a day, that's one thing. In California, we have earthquakes. That's one thing. But when you have a crisis that is unfolding the way this is, you have to exhale, breathe again. We can't hold our breath and hope things will go differently. What you and I need to do as leaders is we need to exhale and reset and move from pause. Pause is either from a fear-based place of, oh my gosh, what's happening? Or pause is in a good place, is an assessment phase. Let's take take a pause and let's assess where we are. So for you, if you're in a pause, or if you find your people in a pause, move them from the fear-based pause to the assessment-based pause. The next thing to do is to bring your point B closer, right? Start thinking about, what do we do this week that will help the business, right? And that's where you start doing some scenario planning on what are the most important things that you need to do, right? Bring your point B closer. You know, it's interesting. What you'll find is many companies are talking about, well, when this goes over, or when this blows over in a month or two. And the reality is, many of your organizations have to conserve your cash, and you have to think about new ways of generating revenue in a very fast way in order to be able to sustain the business through the next 2 months. In a pause, what you find, and what I find when I work with people, is they have those two options that they've created: best case scenario and worst case scenario. Now, best case scenario for many people is the idea that things are going to go back to the way they was. And honestly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not trying to sound doom and gloom, but I want to have a very real conversation with you. That best case scenario, that things will return to the way they was, is a fantasy idea. It is an idea that is built in, let's not do anything, it will change by itself. The other worst case option is that things stay the same as they are, or this, what we're experiencing right now, is the worst case. And let me push it a little bit further. What we're experiencing now is not yet the worst case. It is certainly not easy. It is certainly very, very challenging. But there are worse things that could be happening. So as a leader, what we want to do is we want to move people out of best case, worst case, both of which don't require our participation or engagement, into three options. And when I'm coaching people, and when I'm coaching an organization through some challenges, no matter which scenario we choose, when we're thinking about cash flow, or whether we're thinking about managing staff, or, you know, augmenting the staff in different ways, each scenario we have to come up with at least three options of how to deal with it. It's a very fascinating thing. If you think of only two options, best case, worst case, that creates a very threatening experience for everybody involved. When you add a third option, it generates creativity. It generates resourceful thinking. So I want you to consider, in your domain, what was the best case, what's worst case, and what's at least another option that you can think of. It may not be the plan you hoped for. It's certainly not how you started 2020. But when you create that third option, it unlocks your team's creativity. It unlocks resourcefulness in your team. And it's never been harder to do that than now, because what you'll find is you have basically the media giving you worst case scenario, and everybody else, you know, maybe some folks who are religious or super optimistic. I find what's really interesting is that the internet is full of people being super optimistic. It's going to be okay. And, you know, I think that is nice initially. And then you have, I don't know about you, but I get enough of the optimism already. I want to have a real plan and a real idea so I can take deliberate action. So some companies are in overdrive right now, because if you're an internet-based company, if you're delivering services online, if you're helping activate people to work from home, your company is in overdrive. One of the companies that I work with is a company called Go Noodle. They provide at-home mindfulness and movement and wisdom videos for kids between 4 and 9. They've had 9 times the traffic than they've had before. In the last 2 weeks, they've had 9 times the traffic than they had in the last 6 months combined. It's been an amazing overdrive for them. So they have all 50 people on their team working what feels like 24 hours. So when you're in overdrive, people make near-term decisions. What's really important when you're activating your company to take a hold of the opportunity that is now, or shifting your organization. Some of you are reorganizing so that you can deliver product, or do things differently, make sure that you watch your language. Don't make promises that you may not be able to keep in the future. Be mindful of the things that you say. What most people are working on in right now is a pivot or a pilot. A pivot is a different way of doing the same business or having a different focus in your organization from now. So over here, many of the restaurants have had to pivot from obviously a sit-down restaurant to being able to provide food as a takeout scenario. In California, they've also allowed restaurants to be able to sell alcohol. So you can actually order a cocktail from your local restaurant and they'll send it to you in little jars. And so if you want a Manhattan or a martini, you can actually now get the martini delivered from the local restaurant. Genius for those of us who like a martini. Now, make sure that you're making promises that you can keep now, not promises that you can make into the future, because then you're going to create expectations among your people, and that's also going to drive hope in them. And you need to manage, certainly temper some of the hope, but really get your people to be activated into the present, right? The fantastical idea of when things change, when things will be different, will get you in trouble. Focus on things that will generate interaction right now. Be inviting, right? Use the external factors as an opportunity to generate conversations, possibility conversations. How do you see things? What do you see as options? And it's really important when you're doing those processing meetings to allow people to share some of their challenge, share some of those fears, especially if you do the one-on-one, you can manage the anxiety so that when you do processing meetings in a group setting, you can get to the possibility conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, make hard decisions and make them before they are made for you. I know sometimes this is a very, very difficult time to have to let people go or to take a look at how can you do this. And companies are doing a combination of executive management team taking a pay cut or the whole organization taking a pay cut in order to keep people on. But you may have to make some hard decisions right now in order to sustain your business. You're on this call because you're a business leader, and your job is to sustain the business, to sustain the company, to keep the ship afloat. And as long as you can, keep that ship there so that as things change, as we are able to recognize what's happening, we're able to grow the business, see what happens in this new opportunity, in this new era as we go along, and you can hire people back. But it's important in the name of sustainability that you, yes, absolutely think about the people. And 100%, you can be compassionate with the people, but you have to be neutral about facts, ladies and gentlemen. It's really important that you take and are willing to make the hard decisions. And of course, it's hard to let people go, especially if people have been there for a long time or if it's people that you care about and you know. And at the same time, your job is to keep the business afloat and do your best to care for the people as much as you can. You will find resources in places that you didn't think of them before. Every company is struggling right now. And so you will find that if you, rather than being alone, have the conversation with your partners or your providers or your vendors. Have conversations with even your competitors, right? Because you might be able to find a way to work together. You be the one, though, to initiate the conversation. I think, what's really interesting is I find people are afraid to have a conversation with their vendors or afraid to have a conversation with their partners or competitors because everybody wants to keep the image that everything is okay. The reality is when you have the conversation with a vendor, a partner, or a competitor, or even your customer, you will find that people are willing to come together to do things together. Have the conversation, and you be the leader to initiate that conversation. Don't wait for somebody else. And the way to start that conversation is from a place of empathy and a place of sharing, right? It's really important that you go and reach out, initiate those conversations so that you together can explore what are the options that can be generated inside the storm. Have your core advisors, and that's the beauty of the YDC and the CEO clubs and SARGIA. You have a core of advisors that are close to you that can support you through this process. Trying to do this by yourself is madness, right? Use your advisors, bring them close. It's really important that if you come up with 2-3 options, that you really run through those scenarios. Don't think of them as, oh, well, we could always do this or we could always do that. Plan it out. Do the scenario planning. Gather the data. Explore what the options are. Really do the work. I can't tell you how many times I've found people who are thinking about business continuity and they keep an option in their mind, but they really didn't put it out on paper. And by the time they have to exercise that option, they're about 2-3 steps behind because they didn't do the work to really run through the scenario. Remember, your competitors and your clients could become resources for you to be able to get to the next level. Let's go back to the people leadership part. Right now, we're about a month, 2 months into this, and it's going to go longer. And people are going to get tired. And when they get tired, there's a misery that sets in. And it's important for you as a leader to be able to make a distinction between fatigue. When are your people tired? When are they in anxiety, or when is the misery getting there? And when is there a danger point? What's interesting is we're finding here that people are at their homes. Obviously, they can't leave their homes, so they're in front of their computer all the time. And they're always looking at their work. And I think it's important for people to sometimes during the day step away from the computer, get on your balcony if you have one, or get away from a screen. Don't watch TV, because people go from the computer to the TV to the phone. And sometimes you need a break. And I guess it's really hard. And I understand, it's hard when you're confined to a very small space. But, give your people some space, some opportunity to disconnect and then come back in a different way. And notice as you're talking with people, when are they in fatigue? When do they have misery? And when is there some real danger? It's also important that you show the difference for people, right? That you can tell people also when you're tired, right? We are not in a sprint here. This is going to be not a marathon, but what I would consider an ultra marathon. And we need to pace ourselves. So take the time, exhale, don't hold your breath in the scenario, hoping that it's going to go away. We need to engage. We need to pace ourselves, and we need to bring our people into a place of perseverance. Now, over here, what you've seen on the screen is I've used metaphors all the time, right? The metaphor of running and of supporting each other, as you see on the screen right now. I've used the metaphor of sailing through a storm. It's important for you as a leader to be able to use a metaphor, because the metaphor allows the individuals that you're talking to disconnect from the scenario and not personalize everything, but have a third experience through which they can navigate their own feelings. And as a psychologist and as somebody who thinks about the neuroscience and the brain of how we operate, using a metaphor allows people to disconnect from their own feelings about it and create a collective experience. So as a leader, it's going to be important that you create that metaphor. Listen, we're going to get through this. It is going to take a long time, and nothing will be the same again. But resilience, ladies and gentlemen, is not going to back to the way we think things were, right? Resilience is our ability to rise to the moment. From a business perspective, it feels like the world is contracting and getting smaller and smaller. And it may be that you need to think that way. You may need to think about, how do I do not only conserve cash, but how do I generate revenue? As a leader, you know that you cannot sustain your business only by cutting. You have to come up with new ways of generating value and have that turn into revenue. You may have to ask for resources in places that you haven't been willing to do that before. We are definitely sailing through a storm. And if you're going to sail through a storm, you have to make a decision. Am I going to go try and get back to the harbor, or are we going into the storm? Right now, I do think that we have to go into the storm, put our nose into the waves. Our challenge, ladies and gentlemen, is not to outpace the stress or the adversity or even this crisis. Our challenge is to meet all of this head on. Uncertainty is no longer a passing state. It's now a condition of our life. We're not going to get away from uncertainty. But we, you and me, together here with SARGIA, with YDC, with your connection, with your ability to connect to each other, we will grow and we will create solutions in adversity. And we will absolutely get through this to a day when we look at the storm and we look at the waters and we look at the waves and the sunset in a new way.